Donna Dort. Donna Dort. Donna Dort. This is Lee Dort, and I'm down to dunk. This is Lee Dort, and I'm down to Dort.
I'm Josh Giddey, and I'm down to dunk.
Hey, this is Kenny Hustle, and I'm down to dunk.
I'm Darius Baisley, and I'm down to dunk.
I'm Mike Muscala, and I'm down to dunk.
This is Poku, and I'm down to dunk.
I love cereal. Captain Crunch, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Cracklin Oat Bran.
Oh, I can have these. I'm gonna share with my team, but I'm gonna hog most of them.
Welcome to Down to Dunk. I'm your host, Andrew Schlecht. We're part of the Athletic Podcast Network. Go to theathletic.com/NBA show and get The Athletic for $1 a month for 6 months. It's an outrageous deal. It's not going to last that much longer. I can promise you that. And you can get Sam Vecini's draft guide, which will drop soon. You can get all of his articles. Me and Fred Katz co-wrote an article that's coming out either today or tomorrow, where we talk to a few NBA scouts about the prospects that could go in the 11 to 12 range. So you're going to want to get that too if you subscribe to The Athletic at theathletic.com/down to dunk. With me, as always, on Wednesdays is my good friend Alex Spears. Alex, what's up?
Hello,
Alex. And with us to drop some serious knowledge on the NBA draft, we've got Chip Jones at Chip J NBA. Chip, what's up, man?
Not much. Can't complain. You know, it's nice Wednesday morning getting to talk about some draft stuff. Really looking forward to it.
So let's start it with the number 2 pick. You posted a video a few days ago with clips of Chet Holmgren in the pick and roll as the roll man, as an example of something he didn't do a lot at Gonzaga, but was very good in the limited opportunities that he had. Are there any offensive skills that you think that might be hidden by his role at Gonzaga? And more generally, what do you think of his offensive role? What do you think his offensive role will look like in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's like a lot of things the Gonzaga context like helped with, and a lot of things that it maybe didn't help with. So I would say like the pick and roll, like roll man stuff is like really easy, low hanging fruit. Like he can already do that. He just wasn't allowed to do it. I think another idea that kind of is taking advantage of his ability to handle the ball and kind of flipping the pick and rolls and letting him handle the ball in the pick and rolls. I think that's part of why like Paolo and Chet are such kind of dynamic offensive prospects, is because both of them can, you know, operate as either role in the pick and roll, right? And I mean, that's, you know, the most common thing you're seeing in the NBA. So I also think like one thing they didn't really get to use that would be pretty interesting was using him as like a passing hub in the high post. He didn't really get a ton of time to do that. There was some like high-low stuff with Drew Timme, but usually Timme was kind of like the high man for that. And Chet was kind of just, you know, play finishing at the rim. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be really interesting because he makes a lot of really nice reads. And also like, you know, you kind of see it with like Evan Mobley. Like when you're that tall, it's just really easy to open up the angles to pass. And like, you know, he's got good vision. He's a good decision maker. So like putting Chet in positions to like make decisions, I think is really beneficial. I would say the only other thing at Gonzaga was he had like 39 total possessions where Drew Timme and Anton Watson weren't on the court. So he basically never played 5 out. So being able to kind of, you know, put him in some 5 out spacing at times, I think could be really helpful, even though I don't think it's necessary, but it would be interesting to see kind of how that would change his ability to kind of attack the rim from the perimeter. And then in terms of what his offensive game at like the NBA level would look like, I think generally like you want to get him a lot of looks at the rim and kind of take advantage. He has really, really nice touch at the rim. And then like that catch radius is so high that you can kind of just throw things up for him at times and he's just going to find a way to get it in. But I think like the really big thing with Chet is like, even if you don't necessarily believe in like the ball handling stuff, especially like year 1, year 2, like one thing that can just get you on the court is just being able to hit a 3 and like make the right pass. And he's like phenomenal at that stuff. Like when he's faced with like a decision, he's really good at just, you know, like committing and instantly finding the right thing. And then like he's obviously shot pretty well at Gonzaga. Wasn't like a super high volume, but I do think he'll be like a solid NBA shooter like pretty early on. And then obviously like just making the right pass. So I think like even just kind of spacing the floor and connecting play, kind of like how Mike Muscala I think has been doing for you guys in the past. I think he can do that like year 1 pretty easily. And then also you've got, you know, the roll man stuff, being so good at finishing, possibly like the ball handling stuff. all of that kind of on top as like things he can keep getting better with.
Yeah, you had another tweet that was really surprising to me, although it makes sense because we've seen those coast-to-coast highlights of Chet.
Mhm.
But you had the top 5 prospects ranked by ESPN, which is Chet, Jabari, Paolo, Jaden Ivey, and Keegan Murray. And you just gave us 5 random numbers that were the points per possession as transition ball handlers. And Chet was like by far and away like the best of this group. Now it's 39 possessions, but he was 1.359 points per possession, which is just kind of wild. And the fact that he can do that in transition as the ball handler is kind of like lets you know how confident he is in that handle, that he's willing to do that.
Yeah, especially I think one thing that's really big with Chet's handle, like the biggest thing limiting his handle at this point is like when he's in the half court and he catches on the perimeter and like his man is right in front of him, he struggles to like get his handle started. Like because someone can get up under him and get really close to him, he has no space to get the ball down and start going. But in transition, like on defense, he's creating a ton of stops and then he's grabbing defensive rebounds and then he's just running full court and he's kind of hard to stop because it's, you know, he's got like he loves this behind the back move. He's able to comfortably spin over both shoulders. So if a defender comes at him like head on, he's just going to spin off of them, or he's going to go behind the back and switch directions, kind of like, you know, reading which way their hips are facing and go in the other. And then it's one dribble at the 3-point line. And then he's just going to take 2 massive steps and dunk. And he's comfortable again going with like spins and stuff on those, you know, if he gets past that first level and then there's that second defender at the rim there, he's just going to spin off of them or he's going to kind of reach around them. So, I mean, as a transition ball handler, I think that's going to be a huge thing. And I think that's like kind of the biggest thing for me with Chet is like, I think people underrate how easy a lot of offense is going to be for him just as like a transition ball handler, because he kind of just scored at will. It didn't really matter the opponent. And then like in the pick and roll, just cleaning stuff up at the rim, because like there's not really guys with his level of size and touch and flexibility where he can kind of just grab things and contort and still finish through things. So, I mean, I think the transition ball handler stuff's huge. I think it's a lot of really easy offense, and it kind of synergizes with his defense really well because he's creating so many stops, which is giving more transition possessions, which he loves to operate in.
You mentioned that Chet didn't have many possessions in like 5-out lineups. So that kind of relates to a question from one of our listeners at Matt Sanders NBA. Wanted to know, do you think Chet prefers having another big matched with him, which could have played into why he chose Gonzaga with Timmy? Does this thought process increase the odds of a Duren pick at 12, or does that limit a very flexible roster Presti is building? What do you think about like the ideal front court partner for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I think he likes playing with another big just because having that like high-low stuff, like you saw it with, again, like Cleveland's kind of the obvious example that keeps popping up. You saw with like Larry Markin and Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Like there's a lot of teams that just don't have 1 7-footer, let alone 2. So they could just pass over the top of teams. And it's like this super easy offense. And I think anytime you can create easy offense for a prospect, like a young guy who's developing, that's huge for him. Right. So, I mean, I think playing him with another big so he can kind of do that high low, just like passing over people. And I think another thing is like with entry passes, he's really good at finding like just the right touch and angle to get the ball into the post when he's got a teammate who's got like an advantageous situation. So, I mean, I think playing with another big would be really smart early on, but I don't think it's necessary. And I think part of the flexibility thing is I actually lean the other direction, right? Because a lot of people talk about like maybe, you know, Chet can't play center. I think even if you don't buy into the center things, then he can just be one of the best help side rim protectors out there, right? He can just come in from the weak side as the 4. So I think like in terms of flexibility, I think Chet can be ran as the 5 just because like, yeah, maybe against Embiid or not even Jokic maybe, but like Embiid and stuff, maybe there'd be issues, right? But that's not most games. Like most teams aren't equipped to really play through the post through their center. And then you can also run him as that primary rim protector, especially once he puts on a little more weight in like year 2 or 3. And you can also run him as that help side rim protector. So I actually think it's like a lot of flexibility. As for the Gonzaga thing, I think that's because of Jalen Suggs. They went to high school together at Minnehaha in Minnesota. And they were like really good friends. That was his pick and roll partner in high school. And, you know, Suggs went to Gonzaga and I think had a really good time. So I think that probably played a large factor into why Chet chose Gonzaga.
Yeah, that makes sense. What would you say is like the most misunderstood part of Chet's game?
I mean, part of his game that's misunderstood, I would say probably like the strength stuff on the interior. And like, I think that people don't realize, like, I hear a lot like, oh, any coach is going to be like, oh, well, we're just going to attack him. literally every coach he's ever played against in any game he's played for like the last 6 years has done that. Like that's everyone thinks that. That's like the first thing, right? So I think one thing you can look at is, like, oh, a ball handler isn't the burstiest. So how do they counter defenders? Because they're not going to blow by them, right? So then you look at Chet, like there's a couple things he does and the ways that he kind of absorbs contact to try to not take as much like kind of brunt from that. I think there's a really good clip when he was against Jalen Duren in the post and against Memphis in the tournament game. So one thing Chet does when he's like post defending is first he'll spread his legs pretty wide to try and lower his center of gravity, because the lower his center of gravity is, the more his strength plays up. And I do think like, yeah, he's pretty thin, but I think like pound for pound, he's pretty strong for like being 195. There's some guys like, I think Isaiah Jackson in Indiana is a great example where he's like rail thin, but super strong. Sometimes guys are just stronger than they look. So, I mean, he's really good at like lowering his center of gravity. And also that kind of prevents him from getting drop stepped because his legs are so far out wide. You can't hook that leg around him. So I think that kind of plays up in his post defense. And the other thing is like when here's the big thing for Chet is going to be like seeing the contact coming, right? So if he sees contact coming, he does things like he'll stick his hip out. So that way when a defender or like a driver wants to get their shoulder into Chet's chest, his hip is stuck out. So their lower bodies kind of collide and that absorbs a lot of the contact. So then Chet doesn't get moved back. He did that against Paolo Banchero in the Duke game twice. I think that game was really funny because there was one highlight where Paolo like kind of destroyed him. And then there was like 5 where Paolo like got destroyed and then eventually just stopped trying him. And none of those really got like any, it was all like the 1-and-1, which Chet had already blocked him once before that in that game. But so I would say like the ways Chet absorbs contact. So the big thing for Chet is like, if he sees the contact coming, he's going to do something like stick that hip out or, kind of lower his shoulder to prevent them from getting into his chest and really like pushing him back and affecting him. But if he doesn't see the contact coming, like he didn't expect it, then yeah, that's where you get the times where he just gets kind of blown back, right? So I think the big thing for Chet is going to be like, as he continues to learn, how much can he lean on this? If he sees contact coming, he can totally deal with it. And can you put him in situations where he is only going to be getting contact that he sees coming, right? So I think a lot of stuff like that's really important.
So you mentioned the Suggs Chet connection. Let's say the Magic go with Chet at number 1. We've already heard scuttlebutt of OKC possibly being interested in Jaden Ivey in that scenario. A lot of fans want Jabari or Paolo, but you're the GM. How would you rank that next group of players for OKC at 2 if Chet's off the board?
I think you just take Paolo, and there's like no thought about it, anything else.
Yeah.
Chet and Paolo for me are just like by far the 2 best prospects in the class. Like no one's really close to them.
Yeah.
Interesting. What is it about Paolo's game? Like, because I'm sure you've seen this, like on a lot of mock drafts, like it seems like Paolo's not even getting mentioned in the first 2 picks for whatever reason. Like, why do you think that's happening? Like, are people just missing? Like, it feels sort of similar to like the Jason Tatum thing back in the day, where like everyone's just hyper focused on his flaws and think that, oh, he relies on tough shots and is he going to be able to make those in the NBA? Like, it feels like a very similar conversation. Do you think people are just overthinking this?
Well, I think the first thing that's like the biggest thing to keep in mind with Paolo is like, from what I understand, like a lot of like teams and stuff, they're really focusing on scouting like as their season ends, right? That's when like the player, like the prospect scouting really starts ramping up. And so they're really focused on, I think, a lot of the college stuff. But like something to keep in mind is Paolo's high school tape is absurd. And like you can be like, oh, well, it didn't necessarily translate to the next level. There's like a couple of reasons for that, right? But like, one thing that needs to be understood is like coming into this year, Chet and Paolo were the top 2 recruits in the high school class. And like, it was not close. There wasn't really any conversation for anyone else. I mean, Jaden Hardy was a little bit close, but other than that, it was like really those 2 guys. And so there's a couple things. One, that's important to keep in mind, right? Is Paolo kind of, I think, overbulked. He was a lot quicker when he was in high school. And so I think he's at, he's a little over 240 now. I think maybe, 5-10 pounds lighter. He gets a little bit more of that quickness back and that helps him. I don't think he'd lose like too much of the strength for that. So the other thing with Paolo is like, again, we can go back to role, right? Because like we mentioned earlier, like Paolo can operate as the ball handler or the kind of screener in the pick and roll. And he's like, he flips his hips incredibly quick. So like when he is like popping or rolling, he gets out of there so quick. It's like kind of crazy to watch. So I'd say like people kind of misunderstand that like they look at like all those long twos and isolation and like the post ups, and they're like, that's not super efficient offense. But like Paolo can operate out of the pick and roll a ton, but like Duke just didn't really do that, especially as the ball handler. Like I think pretty convincingly, Paolo is probably the best passer in this draft class. Like, and it's not really very close. I think the multi-layered like pick and roll reads and like the timing and the understanding of like, a lot of guys struggle with this where like there's a weak side defender who has to like tag a roller, but is also covering a guy in the perimeter and they're kind of overloaded. I think one guy who this really pops up with is Benedict Mathurin. Mathurin just throws the pass instantly and doesn't wait. So then that guy doesn't have to make a decision and the advantage is kind of gone, right? Because he can kind of float in between both choices, pass is made, right? Whereas Paolo's waiting for that defender to commit to one thing and then finding the other guy. So I think that's big. And then I would say like, I think people misunderstand like Paolo's flexibility is like incredible for his size. Like there just aren't guys who really like move like him. So I think that's like a big thing. So I think like generally like the over bulking plus like the Duke context, maybe not putting him in what he's going to do in the NBA. And then on top of that, I think like I think one big thing to keep in mind with Paolo is like his ability to like handle the ball. That is like kind of like the flexibility, size, and like ability to handle the ball, the intelligence. That's like a really easy recipe for upside. Like if you look at the guys from last year's class that like kind of blew everyone away, you're talking like Cade, Evan Mobley, Josh Giddey, Scotty Barnes, Franz Wagner. These guys are like, maybe Giddey's not as fluid, but the rest of them, they're like really fluid. They're really flexible, right? They're really big and they're really smart. That like generally just betting on guys who are like bigger than everyone else, smarter and like super fluid, and they can kind of get anywhere on the court. Those guys are just good players and they're not common. There's not a lot of them. Last year was like an outlier because we got so many. Yeah. So I think like passing on one of those guys is a bit naive in my opinion.
Yeah. I've always kind of thought that Paolo fits the Thunder in a way because they've been looking for players that are like good passers, like intelligent on the court, and then have something that, you can't, just stuff you can't teach. And Paolo's got a ton of that. And I worry that and Chet to me is like the guy. Like if Chet's there, he's the guy. However, I just worry about anybody else other than Paolo. And you can see some of the stuff with other players, but I don't know. I would be concerned. So let's talk about front court mates for Paolo. So let's say Paolo's the guy. What kind of front court mate would you want to pair with him?
Right. So I think the one big thing is like Paolo cannot be your primary rim protector under any circumstance. Like he cannot do that. He just doesn't like, he doesn't get up very high when he's backpedaling and his arms aren't super long. He doesn't really have the length. So you really need a guy that's going to be a primary rim protector. I think Paolo he's not really great as a secondary rim protector either. I think that's like kind of the biggest thing with him. I think a lot of people are scared about the defensive engagement, but I'd be more worried about like the long-term value as a rim protector, because I'm pretty big on getting like a lot of good rim protectors out there, and having Paolo, he's probably going to be, I think he can play the 3 to be honest, but I would say there's some slight concern with him as like, you definitely need someone who's like very defensively solid next to him. And I think other than that, like he's really good at interior passing. So I would say someone who has like good hands, someone who has like a solid like catch radius, and then someone who's like definitely like a very good primary rim protector would be who I would be looking to pair with Paolo.
So what about somebody in this draft? Is there anybody in this draft like at 12 that you think fits that?
I think if Jalen Duren falls, he fits that.
Okay.
If not, I'm not really super high on any of the other centers in the class.
Yeah, because we actually had a question from listener at David_BF9 who wanted to know which of those big men would you choose, Jalen Duren or Mark Williams, regardless of who OKC selected, but or considering that they take Paolo. What do you think about the difference between those two? Sounds like you're not very high on Mark Williams.
No, I'm definitely a lot lower than most people. So I would say like a couple things with Mark Williams is like, I think like some prospects get these kind of like, they have these like skills that kind of like don't interact well. And like, they'll get a lot of credit for one skill. And then like people will just kind of assume that another thing works well for them. So one thing with people are really big on with Mark Williams is like his recovery speed. Like he's pretty quick for his size, right? But the problem is like people like when he switches on the perimeter, I actually think out of all the guys in the class, he might be the worst perimeter defending big. Like his one of his big problems is like his upper body is really built out. He's like pretty strong. He's like well built. His lower body is really thin. So he's very top heavy. So like when he kind of like is forced to like lean in a direction, his momentum really carries him in that way. And that leads to him getting blown by a ton. And I think in general, like he really struggles guarding on the perimeter. And then he also has some things with like his shoulder that I'm kind of concerned about. He measured with this like crazy standing reach because he's 7'2" with a 7'6" wingspan, right? But his shoulder, like on his contest, he's not getting like a 180-degree angle straight up. He's getting like a 140-degree angle. So I think there's like maybe some flexibility issues in there, some tightness. So a lot of times finishers can like just finish over him because his arms aren't straight up. They're like kind of in front. And I think at times that can lead to him getting called for fouls just because he's not contesting straight up. So that's a bit worrisome for me. And I think while like those things can be fixed, I think, right? When you get in that point where you're trying to rebuild someone's body as a young player and develop them, it kind of comes down to like, okay, well, we have to, spend a year and a half working on all this body stuff before we can really get into the development. And then all of a sudden they're 23 and you're just starting kind of the getting better and getting more skilled thing. So I think that's something that's kind of concerning for me with Mark Williams. Is just like some of the movement stuff is a little bit off-putting to me, and I think can kind of get him in trouble a lot of the time.
And on the flip side, it sounds like you're much more confident in Jalen's ability to guard on the perimeter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Duren's like truly like a 99th percentile athlete. He's definitely up there for like probably top 3 athlete in the class pretty easily. So I mean, I think one thing that like is pretty commonly known in like draft circles is like guys who are like really young and really productive are like just good bets. Jalen Duren is like the second youngest player in the class. He doesn't turn 19 until November, like pretty late on in November. So first, he's already like 6'9", 230 at 18, right? And then second thing would be like he put up like multiple 2020 games as an 18-year-old playing against pretty good competition. That's kind of like crazy production for him. And I think another thing to keep in mind is like with Duren that I find kind of funny is like before the year, like people, I think with Shaden Sharp, they're like, oh, he was the number 1 ranked high school player in his class and he reclassed up and joined like this year. So it's like, oh, you're getting the number 1 player last year. To my understanding, Jalen Duren was ranked ahead of Shaden Sharp and reclassed just before the year so he could play like the whole thing with Sharp is like, oh, he's a top 5 pick because he was number 1 high school player last year. I'm pretty sure Duren was ranked ahead of him, and then Duren reclassed up, so that's why Sharp got bumped to number 1.
Oh,
so.
Okay. That's interesting. Is there any possibility that like a Duren Chet front line would work?
Oh, yeah, I think it'd be phenomenal.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk me into it. I need you to talk me into it because I'm right now. I'm team don't draft a center in the lottery. That's like I'm firmly there, but I need you to talk me out of that take.
Okay. So here's the thing. So I'm assuming this is just in reliance to like a Mark Williams or a Jalen Duren, right? As like the guys who are kind of considered there.
Yeah, it's more of like the concept that you can get a center in the NBA. Like
Okay.
You can acquire one. Like the Thunder have like $1 billion first-round picks. They could turn even a late first-round pick into a good center.
Yeah. I definitely get that logic. One thing that's big for me is like having a center who can play every type of coverage for the pick and roll. So like whatever is best coverage for the opposing team, you have some guy who can play that. So I mean, I would think like, especially if you're going with Chet, I think Chet and Jalen Duren can give you like different types of kind of rim protection, right? I think Chet can give you that more like kind of classical drop, I think a bit better. Whereas I would be more confident in Duren in like a show and recover or kind of like a blitz. I think Chet's actually pretty good in blitz. So maybe actually Chet's probably better than Chet's pretty good blitzing. But like the show and recover sometimes when he's like really guarding the perimeter is a little suspect. That back to Duren. So he's really young. And then he's also like he's 6'9", so he's a bit undersized. But I think one thing that's really important with Duren that like I kind of have been looking at is like, people always say like, oh, who is your Giannis stopper or Embiid, right? Those two guys come up a lot. Like, oh, if you're going to win a final, you might have to beat those guys. Who's going to stop them? I actually think one of the players with the most success defending those guys is Onyeka Okongwu on the Hawks. I think there was a point where Embiid had a really hot streak this season, like right after the All-Star break, I want to say, or maybe right before, where he was scoring like 35 points every game for like 15 games. There's one game in the middle of it where he scored like 23 on pretty bad efficiency, and that was when he was guarded by Okongwu. So I think the big thing is like those guys, they like, facing up and getting that dribble off and getting like that, into that two-step pattern to like get around a guy and get to their, dunk or layup or whatever shot they're looking for. But with a guy like Okongwu or Duren, they're big enough and strong enough, right? Because their center of gravities are a bit lower to like be strong enough to contest those guys. And they both have long wingspans and they're both really good vertically. So they can get high enough to contest those shots. But when those players face up against them, they're shorter, right? So they can get their arms under them and into their handle and really bother them. So one thing that like, especially when Giannis, I think when the Bucks played the Hawks in like last year's playoffs and then one game that I watched this year, like Giannis is catching the ball a lot further away from the basket, and Embiid too. They start catching further away from the basket because if they catch like really close, they get the ball close to the basket. They can't get their handle off because these like bigs that are a little bit smaller can get their hands under them. And it's kind of like Chet where guys are getting under him and he can't get his handle off. I think Duren does similar things to that. And I'd also say like Jalen Duren is like truly like a 99th percentile athlete. Like he's going to come in the league and be like one of maybe the like second or third most athletic big in the league, just like off rip immediately. Like this guy is truly a sensational athlete. And then the other thing I'd keep in mind is like on the offensive end, he's a pretty good decision maker and passer. Like he makes a lot of really, really nice passing reads. So I think what you guys were talking about, like, keeping the ball moving and getting guys like that. I think the big concern with Duren is like, it's not the rim protection. It's like the offense. Like he can't really create a ton offensively. And it's like, what do I want with that? I think he's a really good decision maker and he's a really good rim runner. Like his lob radius is absurd because he has like a 7'5" wingspan and like a 45-inch vertical or something at 6'9", 230 or whatever. Right. So, I mean, but like how many bigs that are like all defensive caliber are really creating their own shot? And then it's at a point where like, if he can like run the pick and roll and like go for a lob and like operate DHOs and make good passes, you don't really need him like self-creating shots. But then on top of that, he's like the second youngest guy in the class. He might be the youngest if Leonard Miller goes to the G League. So like he's the youngest. He can develop. Like there's a lot of time. You get a lot of time with him because he's going to be 18 when you're going through summer league and stuff.
Yeah, I guess one of my concerns was like what you mentioned earlier about Chet. Like he's so good around the rim. Mm-hmm. And so if you're pairing him with a center who primarily operates around the rim, are you then pushing Chet to the perimeter, which he can still be good there, but are you like taking away this really good aspect of Chet in favor of Duren?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would say is like there's ways around that. Like especially like one thing that a lot of teams will run that like kind of almost completely mitigates the need for like 5 out is like delay offensive sets, which is where you're basically running 4 out and then the big is trailing. So like the big will throw the inbound pass. Your offense will get set up and basically 4 out and the big is trailing. And then it'll usually lead into like a pick and roll, right? Mm-hmm. So then because the big is trailing and they like set up for a pick and roll, their man has to step up to guard that pick and roll. And all of a sudden the paint's open. Like a lot of teams don't have a center that can shoot, but they'll just run delay, which keeps their big like kind of in the backcourt coming late. And the opposing big will step up. And then you basically have 5 out, even though that guy can't shoot. And the other thing I'd say is like Chet's really flexible and he's good at moving through like tight lanes and stuff. And Duren's pretty good at like sealing driving lanes. So I think like you get that value of like Duren's strong enough and smart enough to like box guys out and create space in the paint. So I actually think he's like opening stuff up in the paint. I think Mark Williams is the same way. Both of them are really good at like sealing their man and creating an open place for like a teammate to go into around the rim. So I actually think they can kind of help spacing because like at the rim, just because they're like opening up these like spots where they need to be, right? Just by being in the way.
Yeah. I'm very excited about this pitch that you're making for Jalen Duren because we've been talking about how like it feels like you can basically fit anyone on the Thunder, like of these top prospects. I mean, we've even had conversations about Jaden Ivey running a 3-guard lineup. But that was like the last hang up for me. Like if we do draft Chet, like, can you really draft another center at 12? But I'm becoming convinced based on what you've said so far.
I'm more open to Duren now. I don't like the Mark Williams pairing at all. I think a lot of people do like that just theoretically, but I'm like totally out on that because I think you can find a similar player to Mark Williams. But yeah, I mean, the Thunder do just as much or more scouting than anybody else in the league. And if Presti's convinced that Duren would work, like I think that you have to buy into that.
Yeah.
Because, I think Sam has seen these guys a lot.
So that actually leads right into our next question, because let's move on to the pick at 12, because there's been rumors that the Thunder could be interested in moving up. Is there anyone in the mid lottery who stands out to you as an obvious target for the Thunder, or someone you would like them to draft? Is that player Jalen Duren, or would there be someone else that you think would actually be a better selection if they're moving up to like 7 or something?
So yeah, if you're moving up to like the 7 range, I would say there's a couple guys that really stand out as like guys I would look into. So I think a couple guys off rip, like Malachi Branham stands out in that range. I think Malachi Branham's really good, and I think that's from what I've been hearing, that's like that like kind of 7 to 9, maybe 10 is probably around the range he's going to be going.
Really?
And so yeah, so Branham's really really good at like his shot is like phenomenal, like just a really really good shot maker. He was a freshman. He kind of didn't get a ton of usage in like the first 10 games for Ohio State, but then they kind of needed to lean into him more, and he kind of just like broke out, and all of a sudden was this like really efficient scorer from them all over. And I think he's really crafty in the ways he can kind of create space. And I think he operates well without the ball, which I think is a good thing to put around guys like Gideon Shea. So I would say guys I would look at would be maybe look into Malachi Branham. I think Jalen Duren, of course, I really like Duren. I think he's phenomenal. If Keegan Murray's available, I still like Keegan Murray. I'm maybe not a top 5 Keegan Murray guy, but I still think in that range, I think like towards that like 10 pick, he starts becoming like best player available. So for me, the way I look at things is I always want to draft best player available that I can provide context to develop. So like if I can't give ball handling reps to a guy whose entire job is going to be to handle the ball, I don't want to draft them because I can't develop them, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't have any spacing. I don't want to take a guy that can't shoot if I like am really concerned about the spacing. So I would just go for the best player available, because usually when you look back at drafts, there's like maybe 15 guys that are like maybe 6-year starters that like really, really stick in the league. So when you get to like reaching for fit at 12, like if you think this guy's like the 19th best player, and like there's usually like 15 guys per class that stick, you're all of a sudden getting into the range of guys that don't like necessarily always stick in the league. So I'm pretty against like reaching for a fit. So I would be looking at like, I don't think Dyson Daniels will be available. I think he's probably gone. I think like Ivy Smith, Banchero, Holmgren are gone. Then it kind of opens up to who's left. I would say like Keegan Murray, Malachi Branham, Jalen Duren, maybe Jaden Hardy or Johnny Davis, but I feel like you might be able to get Jaden Hardy at like 12. Yeah. I'm pretty big on him. I think he's really, really underrated. So I think that would be someone I would love for you guys to get, even if you don't move up.
Yeah. So help me with Branham, because I worry a little bit about the space creation stuff. And he just didn't take a lot of threes, which for a player like him, I don't really know what to do with that.
Yeah. So the thing I'd say with that is like his kind of like shooting indicators, like his floaters and his free throws and stuff, I think are generally really good. Yeah. So there's a lot of indicators that he's going to be a great shooter, and his like numbers on the catch and I think off the dribble both are pretty good from 3, even though the volume wasn't super high. Right. I would definitely say he's making more shots in the mid range at this point, but I would look into the ways like he moves without the ball. I think that's part of what really makes him special, is like he's really good at finding ways to get himself open and like create these little windows and like get touches in the paint and collapse defenses. I think he's really good at stuff like that. And I think you're kind of just betting on like, this guy's pretty smart. He's pretty athletic. He creates a lot of space well. He shot incredibly well in the mid-range, like truly elite mid-range college numbers. And you're kind of just betting on this like really crafty shot maker that's good at moving without the ball and is super young, because I think he's also like not quite, I think he maybe just turned 19, but he's like, again, one of the youngest guys in the class. Yeah. Super crafty, super smart. You're betting on him being just a phenomenal shot maker, which every sign points to he is. So I think that's kind of the sell with Branham.
Yeah.
And shout out to our listener at Dylan T37 who wanted to know what you thought about Branham, and I feel like we're doing that. Now, one question I did have, he often gets compared to Johnny Davis just because those are the guards that are in that range, and it seems like one of the big differentiators is their defense. How big of a concern is Branham's defense for you?
Pretty big. Okay. I think he's pretty bad on defense. I think he can get better, and I think part of it is like looking at the progress he's made and like what he's, been asked to do, I think is big. And then the other thing I would say is like generally looking at prospects, like the 2 things you can really like confidently be like, I can fix this, are like a shot and on-ball defense. Those are like the 2 easiest things to improve. I think everything else you start getting a lot harder when you leave those 2 things. But there's like a lot of guys who come into the league and aren't really positive on-ball defenders. I mean, most rookies aren't, but like weren't at college. They're not as rookies. And eventually you get to a point where they're fine. They're like average, above average defenders. They're not really killing you. So I would say like with Branham's like wingspan and athleticism and just how kind of crafty and intelligent he is, I think you can bet on him becoming like good enough defensively that you don't really care. But yeah, I would definitely say Johnny Davis is like a far, far superior defender.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dive into Johnny Davis a little bit more. He's kind of my guy in that 12 range. If they stay there at 12, I really like him. I also like his random Taco Bell commercial, which I'm really obsessed with. So like talk about Johnny Davis and how he could fit with the Thunder as like the third guard next to Shea and Giddey.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first part of the sell for Johnny Davis is like there aren't a lot of guys who are like underclassmen guards that are averaging 20 points a game in like a Power 5 conference in college.
Yeah.
That are like, he's 6'5", right? So there's not a lot of 6'5" guards averaging that in a power conference as a sophomore. And then there's also like not a ton of guys that are like extremely high motor. So like Johnny is like a fighter. Like that dude has one of the highest motors I've ever seen. He does not stop. He's always like 100% effort at all times. And he was a 20-point scorer as a 6'5" guard in a power conference as a sophomore. So I mean that on its own, I think should give a lot. I think the big thing with Johnny that people are maybe missing out on is like, again, like we mentioned earlier, teams and like fans especially like start scouting towards like March Madness and stuff after that when the season's kind of over for their team. Like Johnny Davis was playing through an injury in the tournament and the Big Ten tournament. He got hurt, right? And then B, like if you watch Johnny Davis all season, he was pretty much playing with like the Jordan rules. I saw someone tweet. I thought that was really clever. Like Wisconsin's offense was like an affront to God. Like that was horrible. Just like no spacing, no one could shoot, no one did anything. It was horrible. It was literally Johnny Davis would like drive into 3 dudes and somehow find some finishing angle, like averaging a pretty efficient 20 points a game. It was a miracle that he did that in that situation. So I mean, especially like, and then the shooting numbers, they're like, you look at them and it's like, 30% from 3, whatever. I think it's a little bit below 50 from 2. But like, if you take out like the last like 5 games of the season where he was just playing through injuries, like he was like 34% from 3 and like I think he was just at like 50% from 2. And then he's basically at 80 from the free throw line. I think another thing with Johnny is like his shooting numbers get weighed down by like when he's shooting off the catch, he doesn't prep his shot really well. He's not good at like getting into his rhythm and like prepping, and like before he catches, he's not getting his footwork like set. He like catches, then sets his footwork, and it kind of throws off his rhythm. And that kind of, when you catch, you kind of dip and you translate that power off the catch, like the ball coming into your shot. He kind of loses that rhythm because he's not preparing himself before, which is bad, but that's also really easy to fix. And that would instantly kind of give a little bit of a bump to those shooting numbers in the catch. So the thing with Johnny Davis, I would say, is like he's like he's really, really smart and crafty. He's really, really good at playing without the ball, which I think people kind of undervalue that when it comes to like guys who aren't going to be like Paolo or Chet, right? Yeah. It's really important how they can play off of Shai, how they can play off of Giddey, right? So then it's like he's really good at moving without the ball. He's also like, he doesn't create the most space for shots, but he seems to be able to make them. Like he's a tough shot maker who can operate without the ball and is going to give you a ton of effort. He's maybe the best guy in the class at navigating screens as a defender. Like I have mixed feelings over Johnny's on-ball defense because he's really good at navigating screens. He's really good at using his length to like get steals and blocks, right? But the one thing I'll say is like he gives his guys on the perimeter a bit more space. So like he kind of like hedges his like, I'll stand like half a step back. So that way, when they drive, I can keep up with them and like stay up with them and contest them. But like because of that, he's not really getting under their handle or anything. So I would say like he's like really good at staying in front of a guy, and he's really good at like kind of bothering them around screens. But like his recovery isn't the greatest, and like I don't think he's ever going to be an elite defender, but I do think he'd be a good one, and I do think he could be elite off the ball. And like the one thing I'll say is like Johnny Davis's transition defense. It's a bit obscure of a skill, but he might be the best transition defender I've seen, like I've evaluated, especially as a guard. Like his decision-making on like what direction people are going, like what counter they're going to use and how to stick with them through that, and like blocking shots at the rim and stuff is like phenomenal. So, I mean, I think when you're getting Johnny, you're getting guys like a proven scorer. He's able to get to the rim as like a secondary creator. He can move off the ball. He's a positive defender. And like just incredibly high motor. And I think getting a guy who's that skilled and like tries that hard it's like if you're already at such a high level where you're scoring 20 points a game, you're moving up to the NBA, you're already one of the better players of the rookies, and you tend to like work harder than everyone else. That's a pretty good bet to make, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's also just like a ridiculous rebounder for a 6'5" guy. Just absurd.
Okay, it's time to ask you about Jeremy Sohan, who has become something of a lightning rod among the Thunder fan base, who is scarred from years of draft prospects who couldn't shoot and never learned how to shoot. Listener at Trey Browntown wants to know, what is it about Jeremy that's keeping him in lottery talks? Obviously, his defense is alluring, but is there something about his offense that I'm missing? Are there flashes that make you think he'll one day not be an offensive liability in the playoffs?
Yeah, so the first thing I would jump out to with Sohan is like looking at context. Like I know it's kind of hard to like, yeah, most of these college offenses aren't good. I just said Wisconsin's was really bad. Baylor's may have been worse. I think it was better, but only by a hair. Like their half-court offense was horrible, right? Because like their best guard, who was like their big creator, got hurt and missed pretty much the entire season. So then their offense was like a couple of wings who weren't really like elite shooters, like Sohan and Kendall Brown were both like, they're both like really smart players and they're really skilled, like getting to the rim and stuff. And they make great decisions, but they're also like not really scorers. So you have two non-scorers. Their bench is just a bunch of guys who like really are just like, they're not super skilled for college players, but they're like pretty athletic and they try really hard. So they're not really offensive positives. The guards were like, they didn't really have a point guard because their point guard got hurt. So it's just a bunch of combo guards who weren't really like phenomenal decision makers or shooters, with a bunch of wings who were like non-scorers, and then a bunch of guys who were just kind of like effort guys. So their offense was pretty bad. So I think like if you put Sohan in a context where he's the 5th best offensive player on the court, it looks a lot better than this, where like he was probably like the 2nd best offensive player on the court a lot of the times for Baylor, which is like not great because he's definitely pretty limited. So the thing I would look at is like looking at a guy like Grant Williams. A lot of people just bet on like, this guy's like incredibly smart and he's like really, you know, big. And it's kind of just betting on those guys who are like big, smart, and fluid. He's a really, really smart passer. He's like a very good decision maker. He works well out of screens. He cuts well. And then the thing I'd say is like, Sohan's pretty good when it comes to attacking closeouts and creating a shot. Like he doesn't have like a phenomenal handle, but he's really good at like getting his body in between himself and the defender and like using like moves to keep the ball away from his defender while he gets downhill on closeouts. And then he's a pretty good shooter in like those mid-range, like he, you know, relocates on the catch, he attacks the closeout, gets some space and like takes a mid-range. He's pretty good on those. He's pretty good finishing around the rim. So I mean, I would say like the thing with Sohan is like you guys talked about getting like smart players in who like make the right pass and stuff is pretty much a priority. I think that's the thing with Sohan. And I think like how impactful Grant Williams has been in the playoffs has like raised his stock among NBA teams, because I would have to think a lot of them see him as very similar.
So many Thunder fans favor Tari Eason over Sohan if the Thunder are looking for a big wing at 12. How would you compare these two, and which do you think is a better fit with Shea and Giddey?
Yeah, that's a really tough question, because I think they're both really similar, and I can understand why there's a lot of disagreement on that, because I think it's really tough to say. I personally, like, you know, gun to my head, I would probably lean Sohan by a hair. So like Tari, phenomenal athlete. I just have a couple things. Like one is like we talked about earlier, where like people get like Mark Williams gets credit for their recovery speed, and then people just kind of assume he can guard in the perimeter, but he can't. Tari Eason's got this really nice handle, especially when he's at like a standstill, but he's not really good at like getting those moves while he's going downhill. And then he's also kind of like his upper body, his like shoulders and stuff are a bit like tight. He doesn't have a lot of flexibility there. So like when he's getting to the rim, like kind of, you know, contorting around defenders as you're driving through, you know, like a crowded paint, he really can't do that. And then also like he has no left hand finishing. It's all right handed. So when you get to like the flexibility being a bit of a concern, and then he doesn't really, for some reason, like he isn't really like finishing through contact. So then he's trying to like open windows at the rim, but like only to his right hand. And it really limits what you're doing at the rim around contests. When he's like attacking a closeout or like finishing in transition, he's just going to dunk on someone because he's just a phenomenal athlete. He's massive and he's strong, right? But I think there's like some things with like the handle that people list as like a lot of upside for Tari. But when you're looking at handling, like you're doing it to create like shots at the rim or to create pull-up jumpers mainly, right? Or pass out of it. But the passing really only works if you're pulling in defenders, which is because you're going to score, right? Mm-hmm. So his shot, like he has like super long arms, right? So he loads his shot on his right shoulder. Like one of his guide arm is like this, Like he's loading on the right shoulder. So that shot did not translate to pull-ups whatsoever. He didn't really attempt any. And when he did, like it did not look good. It was not close. Like, so I don't really think Tari's going to be creating pull-ups, and I don't really think he's going to be creating things at the rim. So if you kind of ignore the handle thing, I think Sohan might be a little bit more functional of a ball handler just because he's a bit more like fluid and flexible. And I think his shot is closer to working on like those kind of, 15-footer pull-ups than Tari's. And then in terms of passing, they both make really good passes, but I just think Sohan reads the game a lot quicker. Like a lot of Tari's passes are coming out a bit late or a little bit off target just because he kind of he'll take like 1 or 2 extra dribbles after the window is already open, and then it'll close in time. And then defensively, I think, people lean on like Tari's steal and block numbers, but like LSU literally played like a full court press pretty much all the time. And Tari was kind of just left by the basket. And it's like anyone who gets over the top of the full court press, you like make a decision on where you should go to like try and contest that shot or stop the next pass or whatever, and just use your athleticism and make decisions, which he's really good at. But like he was put in a position that most players aren't, where like pretty much every possession they're trying to get a steal or a block. So he obviously gets absurd steal and block numbers, which I think will translate, but I don't think he's like going to be like the best steal and block guy in the NBA, which is what his college numbers would suggest. And like, just for a little slight added context, LSU's coach like literally had like tip pass goals. Like they had like a goal of like, we want to tip 35 passes a game. That was like their mantra. So like they were like just trying to like get steals and blocks. Like that was their whole thing. Right. So I think some of that can be a little inflated. And I think like Sohan is actually pretty good at navigating screens, which I think is a big difference when defending on the perimeter.
So a quick question that touches on a few prospects we've discussed. Listener at Ryan Pomeroy 16 wanted to know who is the best bet from this year's draft class to guard jumbo creators like Luka, Tatum, Kawhi, etc. Is it Sohan? Is it Eason, Dyson, Jabari? Who would be your number 1 pick in the jumbo creator defender draft?
That's tough. I probably. Ooh, that's really tough because like. If it's a one-on-one, like if we're just playing pickup as one-on-one, I think it's Jabari. But the problem is he's really bad at navigating screens, like really, really bad. And like all these jumbo creators are just playing on the pick and roll every possession. So I have some concerns about like how effective he can be. Dyson kind of struggles to stay in front of these guys on changes of direction, but he's incredible at recovering. So like, if they're going to take a pull-up around the screen, maybe Dyson's not the right choice. But if they're trying to get to like the mid-range and like that in-between area, he's going to recover and pressure them the best. I think Sohan's probably the best of both worlds, where he's able to get over those screens and he recovers pretty well, even though he's maybe not as good of a like pure isolation on-ball defender as Jabari. So I'd probably lean Sohan.
Okay. Wow. That was a great response. Okay, let's move on to the Thunder. Also have more picks. They have the pick number 30. They also have a pick in the second round. Who are a couple guys currently mocked that you commonly see mocked at the end of the first or even in the second round that you feel like you're higher on than the consensus?
Ooh, that's a good question. Hold up. I'm big in like not getting a bunch of outside influence. So like my evals are actually mine. So I don't actually look at big boards, but I pulled up the consensus big board. Let's see.
I mean, I know one of them.
Yeah. Which one is it?
I know you're a fan of Vince Williams Jr.
Oh yeah, I'm very big on, but he's not mocked in that range. So does he?
Oh, he's like the most slept on guy. I've never even seen him in a mock.
No,
I kind of at some point I would like you to give your pitch for Vince and why you think he might be overlooked right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'd definitely be down to do that. Just to answer the question at hand first, I would say Jake LaRavia. I'm definitely higher. Consensus big board seems to have him at 28. I think like another thing, like we kind of touched on this earlier, just betting on guys who are like productive at like a young age, right? Mm-hmm. So the big thing with LaRavia was like there was this thing, right? He went to Indiana State for 2 years, wasn't really like looked at as a big prospect, then transferred to Wake Forest. So for most of the year, we all thought he was 22 because he was listed as 22 years old. But then like halfway through the year, his family came out and like, no, that's an issue. He's 20. So all of a sudden it's like, oh
really?
Yeah, Jake LaRavia is 20, not 22, even though he's listed as 22 in a lot of places. He's actually 20 years old. Yeah, he was like young for his class. So so when you look at it, when we're talking about productive guys who are young, he's a 6'9", he's like 6'9", 230, playing in ACC, so a Power 5 conference. And if you're looking at some of the advanced numbers, he had a 65 true shooting percentage. He got a free throw rate of 0.529, which that's basically how many field goals or how many free throws are you taking divided by field goal attempts. So for every like shot he's taking, he's getting the free throw line like 0.5 times. So basically every 2 shots he takes, he gets a free throw, which is really good, right? And he's good at making them. So then you've got this like 65% true shooting, gets to the line a ton. He rebounds a ton. His assist percentage, even as like an off ball guy, was 20%. So he's making a ton of passes. He's got a block rate of 3, steal percentage 2.7. So, I mean, this guy's like an analytical darling, basically. 20 years old, 6'9", 230, like big enough to kind of guard some like interior guys. And like he's solid athletically. I mean, he's like kind of a dorky looking white dude. So he's not like some uber athlete, but you know, he's like a statistical darling at age 20 in a power conference who's pretty big and he can shoot from like all 3. He can score from all 3 levels. So I think that guy's like a really like, that's the type of guy where people are going to say, oh, he doesn't have like a higher ceiling. So they're going to like kind of limit him. But like in terms of like, he's just good. Like he's just good already. And then like, you know, he can keep getting better. There are things he can add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about Jalen Williams. He's been a draft riser and would probably
Yes.
require the Thunder to get a pick in the 20s for them to get him. But are you buying his big board rise?
To an extent, because I think he should have been like late first, but I don't buy like people are moving towards lotto territory, and I definitely don't buy that. I think one thing is like one thing that's really moving up is he has this 9-inch wingspan, like +9 from his height. He's got like a 7-something wingspan, and he's like, my thing with Jalen Williams is like, first off, like he gets a lot of like people call him like 6'6", 6'7". He's 6'5 3/4, so he's not actually like that. Like he's bigger than most guards, but like the average NBA player is like around like 6'5", 6'6". So he's like average height. So he's not really like gonna be playing like he's not gonna guard up to 4s, I don't think. And then the other thing I'd say is like there's kind of a two-edged sword where it's like, yeah, he has this +9 wingspan and that gives him potential. But then like it's also like you were an upperclassman in the West Coast Conference with a +9 wingspan. He wasn't really a standout defender. So it's like, why can he not leverage that into being dominant at that level, right?
Yeah.
And then the shot I think is like good, but it's not at the highest volume. And he doesn't really beat guys with like burst or craft. I think he's a smart passer. I think he's like a good connective player, but I don't really buy him going into like the lottery range. But I do think around like the 30, 34, if you guys can get him there, that's pretty good. And I wouldn't hate moving up for him in like the mid-late 20s, but I don't really buy the like super high thing, I guess.
Okay. So let's talk about Vince Williams Jr. He's a 4-year player from VCU, but he's only 21, which is nice. You included him in the video you did on draft prospects who were being slept on. What is the pitch for Vince, and then why do you think he might be being overlooked right now?
Yeah, so Vince is maybe my favorite prospect this year. So I guess I'm a bit biased, but I've really enjoyed Vince throughout the year. So the thing with Vince, like off the rip, is like he's a 4-year player. He wasn't really a highly sought after recruit, right? I think he was like a 3-star, like a lower end 3-star. So he went to VCU. So first 2 years, he wasn't like super involved, didn't play a ton, was mainly like coming off the bench. Then last year, he really broke out as like a consistent starter for them. And one thing that was big was like he kind of figured out his shot. So he shot 41% on 4 attempts a game in his junior season, right? He was playing off of Bones Highland, who's on the Nuggets now, who's also at VCU with him. Then Bones went to the NBA draft. VCU didn't really they got a ball handler in, but not to the level of Bones. So all of a sudden they needed a go-to guy. So then Vince, who had kind of been a 3-and-D player his entire career, was like pushed into this like, okay, you're kind of our point guard a lot of the times. He's like initiating the offense and running pick and roll. And for the first like little bit of the season, he kind of struggled with it. But then like he started really figuring it out towards the end. And then all of a sudden, like he becomes this really interesting prospect. So like first things first, he's shooting over 80% from the line for 3 years now. And he shot 40% from 3 basically the last 2 seasons. This year he did it on like 6 attempts a game with a lot of like pull-ups included as well. So I mean, this guy's like a knockdown shooter. Like he is going to shoot from day one in the NBA. And a big thing with him is like he comes off like zipper screens and stuff, and he's hitting these shots off some like movement. Like you can kind of run him around a screen on the perimeter and he can just catch set and shoot like right away. So I would say like his shooting is like very much legit. Then when you dive into some of the advanced stuff, his passing is really good. So he had an assist percentage around 20, which for a wing is like phenomenal. And then he had a steal percentage of about 3 and a block percentage of about 4. So he's creating a lot of events. So the thing with Vince is like really smart when attacking closeouts, really smart passer who like keeps the ball going, can definitely shoot and shoot on a high volume. And like you want him shooting, like he's a shooter, right? Not a guy who's just, spacing the floor. and it's like he makes a lot of stuff happen defensively just because he's really smart and he's got a 7-foot wingspan. He's like 6'5" with like a 7-foot wingspan, so he has like a plus like 7-inch wingspan. And so he's making a lot of stuff happen, and he's really good as like a weak side defender. When you have like two options, he's really good at kind of, hedging and making sure things happen. So I would say like he's really smart. He statistically like searches very well compared to other guys. I think like in terms of like, if you look for guys who shot as well from three on as high of a volume and kind of had like good enough steal and block rates and had an assist percentage, I think it's like 15 assist percentage, 3 steal percentage, 4 block percentage, and like shot 38% from three on like 10 attempts per 100 possessions, something like that. There's like 4 guys who come up. It's Vince Williams Jr., Klay Thompson, Paul George, and Courtney Lee. Those are the only guys who ever did that in college. So, I mean, I think he's slept on because, first of all, he moves like a geriatric. Like, he is like, like, he does not move well. Okay. So, like, but he's like athletic, but he doesn't really like change direction super well. It's not like super athletic, but he can dunk. Like, he can get up. He's not like a complete non-athlete, right? But he does have some slight issues changing direction. I don't think people bill him as a 3-and-D player, which I think is why they're kind of missing the point. Because like if you look at him as a 3-and-D player, his on-ball defense is just not very good. So it's like, okay, well, but again, that's kind of improvable. And then he's an elite help defender, like phenomenal help defender, one of the best in the class. He's a knockdown shooter. He's a really good passer. So he's kind of like that connector role where like you don't really want them dribbling the ball a ton, but like shooting, passing, and like playing team defense, he's phenomenal. And like, you could probably get him as an undrafted free agent at this point. And like, how many guys can shoot, play like good team defense and pass that you can just get for free?
Yeah, that's a great pitch. I'd seen your video, so I was already in on him. But
right. Of course. Speaking of videos, go check out Chip's YouTube page, Chip J NBA. You can also follow him on Twitter at Chip J NBA. We have kept you longer than we said already, Chip, and we got to get to an ad break. Chip, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chip.
All right. We will be right back after this quick break. When the moment for intimacy arrives, you need to be ready, Roman ready. Whether you've been in a relationship for years or just getting started, having the confidence that comes from preparation means that you're free to enjoy the moment when the moment arrives. Go to GetRoman.com/dunk now and speak to U.S. licensed healthcare professional about erectile dysfunction and get $15 off your first month of treatment. ED is more common than most people think. In fact, 52% of men between the ages of 40 and 70 will experience some form of ED. With Roman, you can get a free online evaluation, ongoing care for ED, all from the comfort and privacy of your home. A U.S. licensed healthcare professional will work with you to find the best treatment plan, and if medication is appropriate, it ships to you free with 2-day shipping. Getting started is simple. Just go to GetRoman.com/dunk and complete an online visit. Take care of your ED without leaving home. Complete an online visit today to connect with a U.S. licensed healthcare professional and take care of it. Go to GetRoman.com/dunk today, and if you're prescribed, get $15 off your first month of ED treatment. Make sure you're ready to have the confidence and control this spring. Roman ready. No one likes waiting on a paycheck, especially when you got bills due. Good thing there's Chime. Now you can get your paycheck up to 2 days early with direct deposit. That's up to 2 more days to save, pay bills, and generally just feel good about your money situation. But Chime is more than just getting paid early. It's also an award-winning mobile app, checking account, debit card, and optional savings account. So what are you waiting for? Hopefully not your paycheck. Get started with Chime today. Applying for a free account takes less than 2 minutes. Get started at chime.com/dunk. That's chime.com/dunk. The Chime Credit Builder Visa Card is issued by the Stride Bank N.A. pursuant to a license from Visa USA Chime checking account and $200 qualifying direct deposit required to apply for the secure Chime Credit Builder Visa Credit Card. Regular on-time payment history can have a positive impact on your credit score. Impact scores may vary, and some user scores may not improve. And we're back from that quick break. Thanks again to Chip Jones at Chip JMBA for coming on the show. Another really great talent evaluator. We've been kind of trying to bring on as many guys as possible that have different opinions from consensus, and he's another good one. That was really good.
Yeah, the level of detail was kind of insane on some of those answers.
Yeah, it was awesome. We told him we'd keep him for about 30 minutes. He stayed on for 50. So,
and he also does the videos for Thinking Basketball. If you've ever seen those on YouTube, which are always like great videos. Ben Taylor does those.
Yes,
he's like he's a video scout for Thinking Basketball.
Yeah, the Thinking Basketball stuff is just it's just a way that I don't think. Well, basketball, and it's really it's good stuff to kind of expand your knowledge.
And the thing that impresses me about it is like everyone always complains how there's like that like fans aren't or that like smart basketball content isn't being appreciated. But then you see something like Thinking Basketball and he's getting like millions of views on like really smart basketball content. Like it is possible. Like you make videos like Chip does and like you can get a ton of people to watch them.
Yeah. And Ben Taylor was on a Twitter Spaces with Draymond Green yesterday with the NBA. So like don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry too much, people. Okay. Few things to cover before we go. I want to talk about this Keith Smith tweet from yesterday.
Sure. I feel like there's been a lot of just thoughts about OKC in general that are, I don't want to say like, I mean, it is that they're not informed.
Yeah.
But just like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I mean, you could tell, I was tweeting about the Russell Westbrook idea just because I really wanted people to think about like what this actually means. Because people keep saying like, well, the Thunder have all this space.
Yeah.
They obviously have all this space. Like you can send anyone there. You can send Tobias there. You can send Russell Westbrook there. Yeah. But they really don't. Like they have $30.8 million that they can use before June 30th. But that money, whatever they bring in, is still going to count towards next year when Shea's deal kicks in. So like it's very hard to come up with a deal for Russell Westbrook where you both bring him in and don't go over the tax. And you're having to send out $16 million worth of contract. So like it doesn't make sense. And I feel the same way about the Tobias Harris thing, where like you have to send out less money in that deal. But now you're bringing in like $80 million over the next 2 seasons. And what could they possibly give you to entice you to do that?
It's just not happening.
It's not. But every single
national
article about like free agency trades, it's always, well, the Thunder they'll take anybody. Just send them a pick or two.
Yeah.
But like if you actually look back at the deals, like they robbed these teams.
Yeah.
Like when they got Chris Paul, they got 2 picks and 2 swaps. They got a pick for Al Horford both times.
Yep.
When they traded for him and when they traded him away. Like they're not just doing this because it's fun. Like they are breaking these teams.
And
like
also,
Philly doesn't have any picks to trade now because of their deal with OKC and then with Brooklyn.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're the team that traded us Al Horford for Danny Green, which feels absurd today, watching what Al's doing in the NBA Finals. At least game 1, game 2, maybe not. So here's the tweet. At Keith Smith NBA, if you want to talk to him about it.
Andrew, don't sick your violent followers on him.
I think they've already got him, honestly. I look at like the first 2 mentions. It's people I recognize on Twitter. Talking to teams about the NBA draft. The team that keeps coming up as a natural trade partner for everyone is Oklahoma City, but not for number 2, which is just like, duh. Anyways, okay. Seems to be off the table for now. Most are looking at 12, 30, or 34. As one put it, they don't have roster spots for 4 guys. So my first thought is that's the dumbest logic ever. We're talking about one of the worst teams in the NBA. Even though there's not,
we got to keep.
There are
keep everyone. There are keep everyone, Andrew.
Yeah,
we are pot committed to everyone on this roster.
No offense to anyone that has a non-guaranteed contract.
No offense. We don't have to name them. You can look it up.
Don't have to say their names, but no offense to them. But they can just be waived, and they can create roster spots when they want to. I just pulled up the Sam Presti quotes. Like I don't even have to defend it. I don't even have to like talk about like logically why that's a dumb argument, because Sam addressed this a few weeks ago. The first quote that I put out there was not to select a player that you like because you don't have a roster spot for them today. To me, I don't know if that's the wisest thing. I mean, and then he talks about how like you can just carry players on your team through the summer. You can carry all of them into training camp.
Yeah.
You don't have to make the decision today. So if the Thunder select 4 players at the draft, it's not like they immediately have to waive Veet and Roby and all those guys. Like they don't have to do that. They can keep them, and then they can make a trade. They can waive the guys that have non-guaranteed deals. He even talked about how they may eat some money. John Hollinger replied to the tweet and said like they did that in Memphis where they had to eat a little bit of money to make things work. The Thunder are probably going to do that. They may have to just waive Ty Jerome and you still have to pay him. Like they may do that. I mean, these problems, they can't, they're not just going to give away the 34th pick or the 30th pick or certainly the 12th pick because like, well, we don't have the roster spot for these guys. We need to make sure that, we keep Isaiah Roby on the roster here. I mean, it's just not going to happen that way. That's not how they're going to function. If they may think that a guy at 34 is going to be better than all of the guys that are non-guaranteed, in which case you keep that guy and you let the other guys go. Also, in this whole process, the Thunder have so many draft picks and they have so many opportunities to get better or to take players. There's going to be somebody good the Thunder have to let go. That's going to happen. It happened in the process with the Sixers, and it's going to happen in this process with the Thunder. I don't think they're going to let go of like a superstar or anything like that, but I think that they may let go of a player that ends up being like a really nice role player for somebody. Like that's going to happen just because of the lack of spots. Now you kind of hope that they can keep those guys and maybe package and trade them or whatever you need to do, but it's going to happen, whether it's Ty Jerome or Isaiah Roby, and they may go on to play and like be good for somebody. And you kind of have to be okay with that because the Thunder are going to have just a crazy amount of opportunities to add players to this roster over the course of the next several years.
I think, and maybe Keith's tweet is just a issue of wording, because I do think there's a very realistic scenario that could be interpreted based on what he said, which is just that the Thunder might do a consolidation trade as they did last year for JRE, as they did for Poku. Like that is completely believable. But of course, that requires the Thunder getting back a higher pick. Right. They're not going to just consolidate for the sake of consolidation. Yeah. Now, the JRE one, admittedly, was like kind of close in value. And from what everyone says, it sounds like they were planning to use both of those picks, one for Santi Aldama and one for JRE. And when Aldama went off the board at the end of the first round, it was like, well, we have to go get our guy. Like, these are the two guys we wanted. We just missed out on one. And so maybe that was the influence behind that trade, which if you just look at it, like I think it was 34 and 36 for 32, like isn't great value for the Thunder. So,
but they got the guy that wanted at the end of the
day. Right. So obviously we're all open to the idea that they're going to make a consolidation trade. And I think there's a reading of his tweet that includes that. But this idea that they're going to do it just for the sake of, because they're so worried about roster spots.
This is not the roster to worry about. Now, when we get to next year's draft, and they've got 1 billion picks in next year's draft, it could be more of a concern then. If they take 3 guys in this draft and they're all good, and Aaron Wiggins is still good, and, they may have a problem then. But it's not this roster. I'm sorry. Like, I like a lot of those guys. Personally, they're all like wonderful people. And I honestly don't like the fact that some of these guys aren't going to be here just because of the roster crunch and because, like, frankly, they're not top-notch NBA players. And that's okay too. But they're wonderful people. But they are going to have to move on from several of these guys anyways with this draft and the next draft. And then you might find yourself in a situation where it's like, oh man, like they may not be able to just like bring Darius Baisley back because of the roster crunch. Like they might just have to let him go in free agency, like flat out, or they might have to trade him for a future draft selection or something like that. But yeah, the roster crunch could become like a real thing. It's not this year. I think there are 4 guys that you could waive pretty easily and it not impact the future of the Thunder.
And we've already seen they've made moves to begin to address this. Like the Şengün trade, a part of that was the fact that you're not bringing another guy onto the roster. You're kicking the can down the road with those 2 picks, which you can then, you're just setting yourself up in the future. And that's why I'm really excited by the reports that OKC is one of the teams that seems to be interested in moving up from that 12th pick, because that's how you want those picks to be used at some point. You want to feel like Presti has identified a guy in the draft and he is going to go get him with this surplus of picks. That's how we ultimately want those picks to be used, as opposed to, the little JRE trades. Like we want to see like, moving into the top 10 for someone. And hopefully we get one of those trades at some point, because we know we'll feel super confident with whoever Presti moves up to get in like a top 10 scenario. Like that would be very exciting that if he did that.
Yeah. I mean, if they moved to 7 or 8 or whatever and traded 12 and 30 and whatever else you needed to include to get there, and they took like Shaedon Sharpe and they had Chet and Shaedon Sharpe and whoever they took at 34, I think you feel super excited about something like that.
You'd probably be pumped and jacked.
I'd be pumped and jacked, even though I can't get there with Shaedon Sharpe, mostly because I'm not with the Twitter propaganda. Like I'm not with it. But if the Thunder have seen enough from him, or they have talked to, I mean, a lot of this figuring out who they're going to take, like, Shaedon Sharpe's got like great athleticism. He can be a creator on the perimeter. That's great. To me, with Shaedon, it's about getting in the room with him and like figuring out like what kind of person is this?
Yeah.
Who is Shaedon Sharpe? And if he is like the phenomenal worker that some people say that he is, and he's got a good mentality, I'd say trade up to draft him. But like that's something that we can't know. We can't know that through YouTube and through talking to people that know him. Like that's something that NBA teams are figuring out.
I find that part of this whole process so fascinating, because a lot of the guys who we love on draft Twitter, like they're largely making their evaluations on watching film.
Yeah.
Like they're not necessarily basing it on any type of like draft intel necessarily. But then there's this whole other world with guys like Matt Babcock, who we've had on, where like they're getting all this information that we probably will never hear about, or we'll get like bits and pieces from like random sources.
Well, or hear about it after the draft, frankly, is where a lot of stuff is. I mean, it's the floodgates open up after the draft. I've experienced it every year, where you hear everything about what everybody thought about all these guys, afterwards. Like, well, the reason we took this guy is because of this, or the reason that this happened is because of that. Like other teams will open up about stuff, and I'll either hear it like secondhand or from somebody from another team or whatever are just willing to talk right after the draft.
Yeah.
And that's when you'll just start hearing just everything, about what these teams think about whoever.
And I just feel like every time I have this question of like, why is this guy going lower than I think he is?
Yeah.
I'm coming to the conclusion that it's not necessarily a talent evaluation thing.
Yeah.
It's more like something else is happening here. Either this player is aiming for a specific team and so is doing things to try to get there. And we've heard about stories about that with OKC in the past. Like something else is going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we're kind of limited. I mean, you're less limited because you talk to a lot of beat writers, so you hear a little nibbles, Andrew. You get little crumbs fall down your way, and that's like the most exciting part of all this. Just that there's this whole world that we really don't know about, and we're doing the best we can by like watching how these guys look like on a basketball court. But then there's a whole nother world that we just like don't know about.
Yeah, it really, really matters who these guys are. Like it matters so much. And McKelly and I were kind of looking at past drafts and like guys that were considered to be like to have character issues, and like none of them outperform their draft slot, like none of them. And a lot of times they were like way overdrafted just because of the talent. And you just don't see that often anymore. Like I don't think that there's character concerns with anybody that's going to be drafted in like the top 15 in this draft. At least you don't hear about it. But there were guys that, you know, in the past where I was just like, yeah, there's character issue with so and so, and it was just, I don't know. I think it's really interesting. Maybe people are better at hiding those today, or maybe they, you know, try to emphasize how important it is to these guys. You know, that they're right and working hard. Because
I feel like guys are just so much better prepped nowadays.
Oh yeah,
like for every aspect of this.
Yes, I think basketball wise, I think the basketball is just getting better. I think these prospects are like just flat out getting better from like top to bottom. And then the character stuff, I think people are starting to like really understand like how much it really matters, like how hard you work, what kind of person you are. I think people are realizing, and players are, and the people around them and the agents, like everybody's just doing a better job, you know, from top to bottom. It really does feel that way.
Do you want to bring up real quick, a listener sent us a clip from Colin Cowherd's show.
Sure.
He had Chris Mannix on. It was at Sully Andrew 1 who sent us this. And Chris Mannix was talking about the Quinn Snyder stepping down, how most people are assuming that, like, if he takes another job, it would probably be San Antonio when Pop steps down. Like, everyone's making that connection, obviously.
Yep.
But Chris Mannix brought up that he had heard from someone who knows Quinn Snyder well that, like, don't ignore the relationship with Presti. Mm-hmm. And if OKC got to a point where they started wanting to make a push, and maybe they wanted to shift from a more developmental minded coach to like a playoff coach, like, don't rule out Quinn Snyder in OKC, which was just kind of like an interesting little tidbit. You know, my brain immediately just wanted to dismiss it because, like, we love Mark Daigneault, and, you know, we think Mark's doing a great job, and he's like obviously not getting a chance to prove that in like high leverage situations, like in the playoffs. But,
or in any sort of leverage situation.
In any leverage situation. But we have seen like positive things.
Yeah.
In terms of development, and even in terms of like plays that he draws up, like out of bounds plays are really good.
Yeah.
So my immediate reaction was just completely dismiss it. But if you do start thinking about the future, like, it's not the craziest idea in the world.
No.
I mean, it's not something I would be shocked if something like that happened this season. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But like down the road, if Quinn Snyder ends up not being a part of the Spurs organization, that is kind of an interesting long-term thought.
One of the most challenging things for Sam Presti in this next era is going to be what he had to do in the first era, which I think he decided it too late with Scott Brooks.
Yeah, for sure.
The transition from Scott to Billy should have happened a year before. And could have been way better for the franchise had he pulled the trigger a year before.
Yeah. And by the way, there was like, if you looked at Scott Brooks's resume at that point, like, it was awesome.
It was very good.
It was one of those things where it's like, how could you possibly fire this guy?
Exactly.
So like, I understand why, but looking back, it seems obvious.
Yeah. And maybe Mark develops into like a very good NBA coach. That's possible. But figuring out whether he's like peaked as like really what Scott Brooks was is like a really high level assistant, you know, and that's what he is now. Like, he's with the Blazers, and it's frankly a really horrific situation for him, at least last season was. But like, he's a high level assistant coach that connects with his players and does a good job, and just happened to be in like the right place, right time with the Thunder to really capitalize on the Hall of Fame talent that was here, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, most NBA coaches have to have that kind of talent, and then you have to prove yourself otherwise, where like Popovich has proven in like so many different contexts that he's like a really, really good basketball coach. And Scott Brooks is a good basketball coach. He's not a great basketball coach. I think Billy's frankly just like a better coach, period. And I think that they knew that. And had they been able to do that, you know, or even like Brad Stevens was always linked to the Thunder, you know,
right.
And had they just pulled the trigger with Brad earlier, like what do things look like? So to me, it's going to be like there's several things that are challenging about Sam's position right now. And one of those things is just like drafting the right guys over the course of the next few years. And then the other thing is like having a true pulse on what they're going to do with the coaching situation, whether that be like I wonder what the markers are for Daigneault. What does that look like for him where you understand that, like, oh, wow. Okay. He is going to be our coach for the next 15 years, or man, he's a wonderful person. Just eats, sleeps, breathes development all the time. And that's great. And he's perfect for us today, but we're going to have to move on now to this position because he's not ready to, when the lights are bright, he's not ready for it. I'm not saying that that's the case. I honestly just have no idea. I hope that he is the guy because he's awesome and is personable. And I just think that he's a perfect fit for like Oklahoma City, period. But yeah, it's something to keep an eye on. It's not something to completely dismiss. I mean, it's not going to happen in the next year. I can tell you that. It's just not. But in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, I think we're going to have to really figure out where the Thunder are at coaching wise. It's a really intriguing plot point and storyline. I would not expect Quinn Snyder to be the Thunder's coach because I do think that he's probably going to want a job in the next year. And I just don't see that happening. I think the Thunder will still be in development mode when he's ready to take a job.
Yeah.
But just the idea itself is an interesting one because if the Thunder had a different coach in the NBA Finals in 2012, that series was a lot closer than many people remember. And if you just don't play Perk, things probably look a little bit different. If you're willing to not play Perk down the stretch and you just play Nick and Serge as your bigs. So, all right. Anything else before we go?
Do you want to reveal who our guest is on Slam and Jam this week? I feel like Thunder fans would get excited if you told them, Andrew. Or are you keeping it secret?
I'll tell them. Yeah, Jake Fisher is going to come on Slam and Jam on Saturday. So
very exciting.
Be on the lookout because it's scuttlebutt season, and
he's king of the scuttlebutt.
He's king.
I would argue.
Yeah, he's always willing to say stuff, which not a lot of people are. A lot of people off the pod are willing to share some scuttle, but he's the on pod scuttle champion. So
yeah, so me and Andrew have to work really hard to come up with questions to pull some stuff out of him. So if you have any ideas or any questions you'd like to ask, send them our way.
Yeah, that should be really fun. All right, thanks so much for listening. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Wednesday. Be sure to go to theathletic.com/down-to-dunk and get The Athletic for $1 a month for 6 months. It really is a remarkable deal that you just need to capitalize on today. So hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you guys again on Friday.